Lena Parker had never wanted a normal life. She had spent 15 years serving in the military, moving from one volatile zone to another, trained to spot danger in the smallest twitch of a shadow. Every decision she made had life-or-death consequences, and every day she carried the weight of that responsibility like a physical burden. Her eyes were trained to scan horizons, her mind always calculating angles and trajectories, but beneath the precise discipline lay a deep exhaustion. The adrenaline no longer thrilled her. It only reminded her of everything she had lost along the way, friends who never came home. Moments that had passed in seconds, guilt she could never forget. When Lena retired, it wasn't with ceremony or fanfare. There were no parades, no medals pinned to her chest, only quiet resignation. She moved back to civilian life with one goal: find a place where she could disappear, where the ghosts of her past wouldn't find her. That desire led her to an unusual listing she found while browsing real estate online. It was a remote, abandoned military outpost nestled deep in the Midwest, far from cities, towns, or even reliable cell service. The listing offered no photos inside, only exterior shots of a crumbling complex of metal buildings and concrete. Bunkers surrounded by dense woods. Something about it called to her, not because it promised luxury or comfort, but because it was isolated, a fortress against the world, a blank canvas for a life untouched by human interference. Lena made the decision almost instinctively. A few emails, a signed contract, and she was officially the owner of the outpost. She didn't think about the history or the warnings etched into the steel walls. She only thought of peace and maybe, just maybe, a chance to exhale after a lifetime of holding her breath. The drive to the outpost was long, stretching over winding gravel roads that disappeared into groves of old oaks and maples. The sky was overcast, the clouds low and heavy, casting shadows that made the forest feel alive, almost sentient. Lena's hands rested lightly on the steering wheel, but her eyes never stopped scanning the road. The instinct she had honed in war zones did not fade overnight. Even now, in what she thought was safety, she noticed subtle cues, a branch that seemed freshly broken, the distant silhouette of a hawk circling above, the wind carrying unfamiliar scents. She reminded herself it was nothing, but even that reminder was a lie. By the time she arrived, the sun was barely a sliver on the horizon, painting the sky in muted golds and grays. The outpost emerged from the trees like a relic of some forgotten war. Its metal walls streaked with rust, doors hanging slightly off their hinges, and faded military insignias hinting at a time when this place had been alive with purpose and command. The silence that greeted her was almost violent, pressing against her ears, almost as if the outpost was holding its breath, waiting to see what she would do. Lena stepped out of her car, her boots crunching against the gravel. She walked slowly, surveying every corner, every shadow. She could feel the ghosts of the past lingering in the air, the echo of shouted commands, the vibration of artillery, the tension of men who never slept. She wanted to shake it off, tell herself it was just old memories, just dust and decay, but a shiver ran down her spine anyway. Her first day was spent exploring. Broken radar dishes leaned against walls, the edges of bunkers were half buried in overgrowth, and she found a large steel door with a warning sign, restricted, authorized personnel only. The kind of sign that would make most people turn away didn't intimidate her, it intrigued her. She made a mental note to investigate, though not immediately. For now, she was content to wander, to touch the cold metal of the walls, to listen to the wind whisper through broken windows. Night fell, and Lena lit a small stove inside one of the intact buildings, the flames casting flickering shadows across the concrete floors. Outside, the forest was alive with noise, the rustle of leaves, the calls of nocturnal birds, the distant murmur of a stream, but there was something else too. A low, distant hum that she couldn't identify. It could have been helicopters, it could have been the wind, or maybe it was her imagination. Lena shook her head, smiling faintly at herself. Even in retirement, even in peace, her mind refused to stop scanning, calculating, and anticipating. As she lay down that night on a cot she had brought inside, Lena stared at the ceiling. She felt both exhilarated and uneasy. This was the life she had chosen, isolation, solitude, and the faint thrill that maybe, just maybe, she had stepped into a story much larger than she realized. She closed her eyes, but sleep was uneasy. For the first time in years, Lena wondered if peace might be harder to find than she thought. The first morning at the outpost arrived like a quiet warning. Sunlight filtered weakly through the thick canopy of trees, brushing the metal walls with pale gold. Lena stepped outside her temporary shelter, stretching stiff muscles that hadn't felt peace in years. The air was crisp, tinged with the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves. She inhaled deeply, savoring the solitude, but a nagging sensation tugged at her instincts. Something about this place felt alive, as if it were observing her, evaluating her. She dismissed it as paranoia at first, a leftover reflex from years of living in conflict zones. Yet every sense in her trained body prickled with subtle warning signs. The outpost was larger than she had imagined. Rusted vehicles sat abandoned, partially sunk into mud, their wheels locked in time. Satellite dishes tilted at odd angles, pointing toward the sky like broken antennae. Concrete bunkers jutted from the earth, their edges chipped and scarred with decades of neglect. She walked among them slowly, her boots crunching against gravel and fallen leaves, eyes scanning for anything unusual. Each step echoed in the silence, a reminder that here, she was alone but not necessarily safe inside the main building. Dust motes danced in the sunlight that pierced through cracked windows. Lena ran her fingers along cold, metallic surfaces, imagining the soldiers who had once moved through these halls with purpose, adrenaline pumping through their veins. She found old maps pinned to the walls, detailing exercises long since forgotten, and faded files on metal shelves. Each item told a story, whispered hints of lives once lived and missions executed. The outpost was a time capsule, preserved in a kind of frozen memory. But Lena couldn't shake the feeling that it held secrets waiting for the right person to discover them. Her attention was drawn to a massive steel door at the rear of the compound, its surface streaked with rust and paint flaking like peeling skin. The warning sign read, "Restricted, authorized personnel only, breach will result in serious consequences." Most civilians would have turned away. Most people would have left the curiosity to rot in their minds. Lena, however, felt an irresistible pull. She studied the door, noting the heavy hinges and the mechanical locks still intact. A thrill ran through her veins, part fear, part excitement, the same thrill she had felt in countless ambushes and stackouts in her past life. Lena spent the rest of the day exploring smaller buildings, uncovering broken radios, filing cabinets with scattered paperwork, and remnants of what looked like old surveillance equipment. She found rooms lined with shelves of tools and mechanical parts, some so rusted they crumbled at her touch. As she moved through each space, she realized that this outpost hadn't just been a military checkpoint. It had been a hub of activity, a site where careful experiments and operations had been conducted. The more she discovered, the more the place felt like a living puzzle, a network of hidden purposes and unseen dangers. Evening arrived swiftly. Shadows stretched across the compound, elongated and distorted by the fading sun. Lena lit a small lantern, its flickering glow casting the rusted walls in a golden haze. As she worked to make one of the buildings livable, moving debris to clear a small sleeping area, she heard it again, a distant, low hum that didn't belong in nature. She froze, listening intently. It could have been a helicopter, far away, or just her imagination. Yet instinct told her otherwise. Her military training, honed through years of observing and anticipating threats, screamed that she wasn't as alone as she thought. To test her intuition, Lena set up a small perimeter around the main building using rudimentary traps and improvised alarm wires. She wasn't expecting an attack, but her body demanded preparedness. She checked every window and entry point, noting every shadow and every sound. The wind whispered through the trees like a cautionary voice, bending branches and stirring leaves in patterns almost deliberate. Lena couldn't help but smile grimly. After years of facing life-or-death situations, she had returned to a world where her skills mattered again. Even in the quietest corners of an abandoned outpost, night fell, darker than the day had promised. The forest seemed to lean in closer, the sounds of wildlife amplified in the stillness. Lena lay on her cot, lantern casting long, dancing shadows across the walls. She felt a strange mixture of exhilaration and unease, the thrill of discovery tinged with the shadow of foreboding. For all its abandonment and decay, the outpost demanded respect, and she instinctively knew it had not yet revealed all of its secrets. Somewhere in the steel and concrete, the past was waiting, and Lena had walked straight into it. The morning air was colder than Lena had expected. Fog clung to the treetops and crept along the gravel road, curling around the abandoned vehicles like restless spirits. The forest had grown quiet overnight, but Lena's instincts told her that silence was never a sign of safety. Her first cup of coffee in the outpost's makeshift kitchen did little to settle the uneasy feeling that had taken root in her chest. Something was waiting, something that had been here long before her arrival, something that watched. Lena returned to the steel bunker she had noticed the day before. Its surface gleamed faintly in the filtered light, a metallic monolith untouched by time, yet somehow alive with history. She inspected the lock carefully. It was old but sturdy. With patience born of years spent dismantling explosives and bypassing security, she managed to pry it open, the heavy door groaning in protest. The smell hit her first, a sharp, metallic tang mingled with the decay of years. Dust rose in lazy clouds as she stepped inside, her boots echoing against the concrete floor. The interior was astonishingly preserved. Filing cabinets, metal shelves, and crates were stacked neatly, as if the personnel had left abruptly but deliberately. Papers, maps, and ledgers littered the floors, though many were covered in dust and faded with age. Lena knelt to examine one. The words jumping out at her: live fire exercises, reconnaissance tests, classified personnel tracking. Another map showed a network of satellite grids and sensor placements, with annotations written in precise, almost clinical handwriting. She realized this outpost had been far more than a simple military outpost. It had been a hub of intelligence operations, surveillance experiments, and possibly clandestine research that never reached public eyes. Her pulse quickened. She had been trained to recognize threats in the field, to anticipate every movement, but this was different. The danger wasn't immediate, it was embedded in the very walls of the place, in the knowledge left behind by people who had understood the stakes better than anyone alive today. Lena felt a shiver crawl down her spine. She had stumbled into something far bigger than herself, something that could reach beyond the forest, beyond the gravel roads, all the way into the offices of power she had left behind. As she rifled through the papers, Lena uncovered personal logs from soldiers stationed here decades ago. They spoke of night missions, untested equipment, and operations that blurred the line between training and experimentation. One journal entry mentioned the installation of a prototype system capable of tracking individuals using signals undetectable by conventional means, a system that could monitor locations, movements, and even communications in near real time. Lena froze, her military mind running through the implications. If any of this system still functioned, even partially, her presence here would have triggered alarms long before she ever arrived. Outside, the hum she had noticed before returned, faint but persistent. Lena peered through a cracked window and saw shadows moving in the distance, dark shapes cutting through the fog. At first, she thought it was her imagination, the edge of paranoia that had stayed with her since she retired. But then it became clear. Someone was watching, tracking, and possibly closing in. Her heart began to race, not from fear alone, but from the certainty that her life would soon intersect with forces far beyond what she could anticipate. Lena spent the rest of the day setting up rudimentary security measures around the bunker. She rigged simple alarms with wires and cans, noting escape routes and vantage points, running through scenarios in her head like she had countless times on missions. Every instinct screamed that she was being observed, but she also recognized that this knowledge could be a weapon. She had survived life-threatening missions before. She had thrived when cornered, and she knew the difference between panic and preparation. As night approached, the bunker took on a different atmosphere. Shadows stretched unnaturally long across the concrete floors, twisting with the flicker of her lantern. Each sound, an owl hooting, a branch snapping, felt magnified, weighted with significance. Lena lay awake on a cot, thinking of the soldiers who had once walked these halls and the secrets they had left behind. Somewhere in this outpost, the past was alive, and it was aware of her. She wasn't just an intruder. She was a player now, drawn into a game she hadn't yet fully understood, a game that could decide more than her own fate. By midnight, Lena realized the truth. The outpost was not just abandoned. It was waiting for someone with the skills to unlock its secrets, and now, unwillingly, she had become that someone. The first hints of danger came quietly, almost imperceptibly, as Lena moved through the outpost the next morning. The wind carried a faint metallic hum that did not belong to nature, and the trees seemed to lean unnaturally, bending with the rhythm of a force beyond her vision. At first, she brushed it off as coincidence, her imagination, sharpened over years of solitary missions. But instincts, honed on distant battlefields, rarely lied. Lena's gut told her she was no longer alone. By late afternoon, the hum became undeniable. High above the treetops, a shadow crossed the sun, a helicopter. Its form was distant, almost ethereal, yet precise. Lena froze mid-step, calculating its trajectory with a sniper's precision. She observed its movements, noting patterns in its flight path. It wasn't random. It was systematic, deliberate. Someone was circling, observing, cataloging every corner of the outpost. Her mind raced, remembering her military training. Years of surveillance work, infiltration, and reconnaissance flooded her thoughts. The outpost had been abandoned decades ago, yet now it was alive in ways she could never have anticipated. The very ground beneath her feet seemed to hum with anticipation. She realized that someone or something was tracking her movements, and the outpost was not as forgotten as she had believed. She returned to the bunker, methodically checking entry points and reinforcing weak areas. Using bits of wire, cans, and broken machinery, she improvised alarms that would alert her to approaching footsteps. Each step outside, each creak of the floorboards, each whisper of the wind became a variable in a complex calculation. Lena was preparing for contact, and she understood that her success depended on anticipation, speed, and precision. By evening, the threat became more concrete. Shadows flickered at the edges of her vision, moving along the periphery of the compound. Figures in dark uniforms emerged briefly between trees, then disappeared, leaving only silence in their wake. Lena crouched behind a broken wall, heartbeat steady but mind racing, cataloging the perimeter, calculating likely entry points, imagining every possible ambush. She recognized the methods. They were trained professionals, not ordinary trespassers. Whoever was coming knew what they were doing. Her thoughts drifted to the past, to missions she had completed in hostile territories. She remembered being outnumbered, outgunned, and yet surviving because she had seen threats where others saw none. This was no different. She had been chosen for precision, for anticipation, for action under pressure. Now, every skill she had honed over a lifetime would be tested not in a distant desert or war zone, but in the dense Midwest forest surrounding an abandoned military outpost. Nightfall brought an eerie stillness. Lena sat in the bunker, listening to the forest, listening to the hum, listening to the occasional distant echo of blades slicing through the air. She reviewed maps, traced the potential paths of intruders, and memorized the terrain. Each decision mattered. Each moment of hesitation could mean capture or worse. She realized that whoever was tracking her did not expect resistance. They expected compliance. And Lena Parker did not comply. Her mind returned to the bunker's steel walls, the classified documents she had discovered, and the secret experiments detailed in the logs. It was clear now, her presence had triggered a response. The outpost had been abandoned, but not erased. It had left traces, signals, patterns, and intelligence that had alerted modern operatives. And now, by merely being here, she had become a target. As midnight approached, Lena moved quietly through the compound, checking traps, reviewing escape routes, and observing from hidden vantage points. The forest, the outpost, and the approaching threat had become one intricate system, and she was its center. She understood that the balance of awareness and action would determine whether she survived the night. Every sound, every shadow, every whisper of movement mattered. By the early hours, Lena confirmed her fear. She was being hunted. The outpost had pulled her in not by accident but by design. The government or someone with military precision was aware of her presence, closing in slowly, methodically. Lena Parker, ex-sniper, had stumbled into a situation that demanded every ounce of her skill, her intellect, and her courage. And for the first time since retiring, she felt the exhilarating rush of being truly alive. Night had swallowed the outpost, wrapping it in a blanket of darkness so complete that even the moon seemed afraid to shine. The forest around Lena's temporary sanctuary was alive with noises she had once welcomed as signs of life: rustling leaves, the distant calls of owls, the snap of twigs under unseen feet. But tonight, every sound carried a threat. Every shadow could conceal an enemy. Her instincts were screaming warnings she could neither ignore nor fully articulate. From her vantage point atop a small rise near the main building, Lena could see movement among the trees. Figures in dark uniforms glided silently across the perimeter, their forms momentarily illuminated by the faint glow of the moon. They were methodical, trained, and utterly focused. Whoever they were, they didn't stumble, hesitate, or make noise. Lena's heart rate steadied as she observed them, calm, calculated, and ready. This was her element, even if the battlefield had changed. She had prepared for this moment without realizing it. Over the past days, she had set traps, thin wires connected to cans, tripwires across potential paths, rudimentary alarms crafted from scrap materials. She had memorized every route through the compound, every hiding place, every vantage point. Years of sniper experience had taught her one undeniable truth: anticipation was everything. Now that knowledge would determine whether she survived the night. The first figure stepped into the clearing, and Lena exhaled slowly, steadying her aim. She was no longer the retiree seeking solitude. She was a sentinel, a ghost of the outpost, a lethal presence waiting for the first misstep. She didn't fire immediately. Patience was part of the plan. She watched as two more figures approached, scanning the ground, unaware of the silent alarms she had triggered moments before. A can clattered against the gravel, drawing attention. One operative paused, his head turning sharply toward the sound. Lena remained motionless, heart steady, waiting for the right moment. Her memories flashed unbidden: operations in hostile territory, ambush in deserts, snowy forests, and urban war zones. She had faced enemies who outnumbered her, who were better armed, and yet she had survived because she could anticipate their moves. Every mission had taught her how to blend into shadows, how to manipulate perception, how to turn fear into advantage. Tonight, those lessons would serve her again. The operatives moved cautiously now, splitting up, trying to flank the outpost. Lena triggered another improvised alarm. A tripwire snapped a bell, echoing through the compound. Shadows darted between buildings, searching. She watched, silently calculating, noticing gaps in their formation. One mistake, one hesitation, and she would exploit it. Minutes stretched like hours. Lena moved silently from shadow to shadow, placing herself in a position where she could monitor multiple entry points. She was aware of the helicopters still circling overhead, though distant, their presence a reminder of the scale of the threat. The outpost, abandoned yet alive, became a weapon in her hands. Every wall, every broken structure, every rusted vehicle was now part of her strategy. Suddenly, a figure broke cover, rushing toward the bunker. Lena reacted instantly, her training kicking in. She leapt from shadow to shadow, silently, landing behind the operative in a position to control him without confrontation. The man froze, realizing too late that the hunter had become the predator. Lena held him in place long enough to force him to retreat, signaling to his team that they were not in control. The others paused, uncertain, scanning the darkness for the source of the ambush. The standoff continued for hours, each side probing the other, testing reactions, measuring patience. Lena knew this was not the end. It was a beginning. By midnight, she had established dominance over the immediate area. But the presence of unseen forces, watching from the air and the forest edges, reminded her that the game had only just begun. Her past had caught up with her, and the outpost, with all its secrets, was no longer a quiet refuge. It was the center of a deadly chessboard, and she was one move away from checkmate. As the night deepened, Lena retreated to the bunker for cover, setting new traps and observing the perimeter. Her mind was sharp, alert, and ready. She had survived worse, adapted faster, and tonight she would survive again. The outpost, once abandoned, had become alive with danger, and Lena Parker was ready to meet it head-on. Dawn had yet to break. But Lena Parker was already awake, crouched in the shadows of the bunker, eyes scanning the perimeter like a predator. The forest was silent now, almost unnaturally so, the kind of silence that made every distant bird call and snapping twig feel amplified. The helicopters had not returned since last night, but Lena knew it was only a matter of time. Whoever had sent them was organized, patient, and methodical. They were waiting for mistakes, and mistakes were a luxury she could not afford. Her mind turned to the documents she had discovered over the past 2 days. Classified logs, old intelligence reports, and technical schematics littered the bunker floor. As she read, Lena pieced together the disturbing picture. This outpost had never been just a simple military site. It had been part of a secret program, a Cold War-era experiment designed to test and monitor technologies that blurred the line between intelligence gathering and control. The documents mentioned a prototype system capable of tracking individuals across vast distances, even predicting movement patterns. Its purpose had been classified, its existence almost erased from records, but the outpost had left a faint echo in the military network, enough to flag her presence as a potential threat. A low hum vibrated through the ground beneath her boots, barely perceptible but unmistakable. Lena paused, listening. It was a signal and automated system, still active after decades, scanning for anomalies. Her pulse quickened. She realized, with a chill creeping down her spine, that her arrival had not gone unnoticed by accident. She had inadvertently triggered a network of intelligence sensors, and now she was being watched in ways that extended far beyond the outpost itself. The more she dug into the files, the more she understood why she was being hunted. Her military history, her knowledge of advanced surveillance and tracking techniques made her uniquely dangerous. To them, she wasn't just a civilian trespassing on abandoned property. She was a liability, someone who could uncover sensitive operations. And with the outpost's data in her hands, Lena held proof of experiments and systems the government had long since wanted buried. Outside, shadows shifted among the trees. Lena peered through a cracked window, noting movement along the forest edge. Operatives in tactical gear advanced cautiously, using the terrain for cover. She watched, noting every step, every change in formation. They were trained professionals, and they had assumed they were in control, but they underestimated her. She had spent years thinking in 3 dimensions, reading human behavior under pressure, anticipating actions before they happened. Tonight, her skills were the difference between survival and capture. Lena realized she had to act. Sitting in the bunker, she began decoding the encrypted transmissions she had intercepted from the outpost's old communication systems. Lines of code, frequencies, and signal patterns revealed a startling truth. The government or a faction within it still monitored the site, still had operatives ready to respond. Her presence had been detected within hours, and a tactical unit had already been mobilized. She was not only in danger, she was in the eye of a web of intelligence operations that had never intended to be disturbed. The implications were staggering. The technology tested here could manipulate information, track individuals, and erase evidence of actions taken decades ago. Lena understood that the outpost had been a kind of sentinel, a guardian of secrets too dangerous to leave unprotected. And now, by simply being here, she had stepped into a storm that had been building for years. Her mind raced, but there was no time for panic. She mapped escape routes, memorized vantage points, and prepared contingencies for every scenario she could imagine. Lena had survived hostile urban combat, remote ambush, and enemy forces that outnumbered her 10 to 1. This was different, yes, but not impossible. She was alone, but she was prepared. The outpost, with all its secrets and dangers, was now her ally. As night began to fade, Lena realized the truth in stark clarity. She was not here by coincidence. She was here because her skills and knowledge made her uniquely capable of unraveling what the outpost held. And that capability had painted a target on her back. Every helicopter above, every operative in the forest, every silent drone of surveillance was a reminder that the past had caught up with her, and that the truth, once unearthed, could be more dangerous than any battlefield she had ever faced. Lena Parker tightened her grip on the steel edge of the bunker window. She was ready. The storm had begun. By the first hints of dawn, Lena Parker knew she had to move. The perimeter was no longer silent. Shadowed figures had infiltrated the forest edges, and the hum of distant helicopters reminded her that time was running out. She crouched low in the bunker, scanning the tree line and recalculating escape routes. Years of sniper training had taught her one undeniable truth. The moment hesitation set in, death became an option. Every step now required precision, foresight, and the patience to wait for the perfect opening. Lena began by securing the bunker itself. Using wires, scrap metal, and discarded equipment, she improvised traps to slow anyone who might follow her. A tripwire here, a tipped-over barrel there, simple yet effective distractions that would give her precious seconds. She studied the terrain, memorizing the subtle rise and fall of the ground, noting the best cover and the blind spots in the enemy's approach. Each movement of the operatives outside confirmed her suspicions. They were professional, organized, and relentless. But they underestimated her knowledge of the environment and her ability to turn even the abandoned outpost into a weapon. She moved out just before the sun fully rose, cloaked in shadows. Trees loomed over her as she crept toward a concealed exit she had identified the previous night. Every step was calculated. A snapped branch could be fatal. She paused, listening. In the distance, the sound of boots crunching over gravel alerted her that the operatives were approaching the main compound. Lena took a deep breath, recalling every urban raid, every hostile reconnaissance, every ambush she had endured. Nothing in her past could compare to the stakes of today, but the instincts were the same. As she neared the perimeter, a helicopter hovered above, its spotlight sweeping across the treetops. Lena pressed herself into the underbrush, holding her breath as the beam passed mere inches above her head. She waited for it to move past before continuing, silently counting seconds, moving like a ghost between patches of shadow. Every trap she had set began to function. An unsuspecting operative tripped a wire, the loud clang echoing through the trees. Shouts followed, confusion spread enough for Lena to gain a critical lead. Her heart pounded, but her mind remained clear. She advanced to a narrow ravine she had scouted earlier, knowing it would funnel any pursuers into predictable paths. There, she leveraged gravity and terrain, dislodging a fallen log to block one approach and forcing another operative off balance. Each action was precise, a deadly dance of intellect and physical skill. Lena's experience had taught her that fear sharpened the senses, and tonight that fear was her ally, keeping her movements deliberate, her awareness heightened. As the morning light filtered through the canopy, Lena reached the edge of the forest, carrying a small pack with the key documents she had retrieved from the bunker. The data contained evidence of decades-old experiments, classified intelligence and surveillance programs the government had tried to erase. This knowledge made her a target, but it also gave her power. She moved quickly, using every ounce of stealth she had honed over her career, merging with the forest as if she were part of it. For hours, Lena navigated the wilderness, exploiting every tactical advantage. The operatives followed, but her traps, knowledge of the terrain, and strategic misdirection kept them at bay. At one point, she paused in a small clearing, catching her breath and listening to the distant thrum of engines. They were close, but she was faster, smarter, and invisible in plain sight. The outpost behind her had served its purpose. It had revealed its secrets, tested her skills, and now it was time for her to escape before the net closed completely. By midday, Lena had reached a narrow dirt road leading to an unmonitored area she had identified on the maps. She knew the pursuit was far from over. The helicopters would return. Reinforcements would be called, but she had bought herself time. For the first time in days, she allowed herself a moment of relief. The tactical escape had succeeded, and she still held the most dangerous secret of all, the truth hidden in the abandoned outpost. Lena Parker disappeared into the wilderness, a ghost among the trees, carrying not just evidence but the certainty that she had survived against overwhelming odds. The outpost, once abandoned, had become her proving ground. And as the first rays of sun broke over the forest, she knew the game was far from over, but she was ready for whatever came next. By the time the first light of dawn filtered through the thick forest canopy, Lena Parker had already put miles between herself and the abandoned outpost. Her movements were deliberate, every step measured and silent. Yet she was aware that the net of surveillance, both seen and unseen, had not fully released her. The helicopters from last night were gone, at least for now, but the faint hum in the distance reminded her that the danger was far from over. She wasn't running blindly, she was navigating a battlefield of her own design. A forest transformed into an escape corridor where every tree, rock, and shadow was an ally. Her mind raced as she calculated her next moves. The documents she carried were her lifeline and her liability. They contained classified information about decades-old experiments, covert surveillance programs, and intelligence operations that had been deliberately erased from official history. Governments, intelligence agencies, and operatives she could only imagine would consider her possession of this material unacceptable, even dangerous. Yet she held the cards now. Knowledge was power, and for the first time in years, Lena had an upper hand. As she moved through the dense undergrowth, she carefully avoided roads and open spaces, knowing that aerial surveillance could detect the smallest disturbances. Every instinct was engaged, every memory of reconnaissance and evasion from her military past serving as a guide. She set improvised markers along her route, subtle scratches on bark, displaced leaves and bent branches so she could retrace her path if necessary, or mislead anyone who followed. Eventually, she reached a small clearing with a view of the distant horizon, a place she had identified on one of the old maps as minimally observed. Here, Lena allowed herself a moment to breathe, to scan the terrain, and to plan the next stage of her journey. The relief was brief. She could feel the weight of anticipation pressing on her. The outpost behind her, abandoned yet lethal, had been a proving ground, but the pursuit was not yet complete. She understood that she had to move quickly to ensure the safety of both herself and the evidence she carried. With careful deliberation, Lena activated her last layer of precautions. She doubled back along a hidden path, using her knowledge of line of sight and the terrain to avoid detection. She manipulated natural features to create false trails, footprints leading nowhere, broken branches pointing in misleading directions. Helicopters might return, operatives might advance on the roadways, but Lena was no longer a passive target. She had become the hunter, the strategist, and the unseen ghost orchestrating her escape. Hours later, she reached a small, unmonitored road, a forgotten path that the maps indicated as rarely used. Here, she had arranged for supplies and temporary transport, everything carefully planned to avoid attention. She paused, listening to the forest, the faint wind whispering through the leaves, the distant calls of wildlife masking the subtle movements of pursuit. She knew the helicopters could return at any moment, but she also knew that they had underestimated her resilience, her training, and her patience. Lena made contact with a trusted journalist through an encrypted line, providing evidence of the outpost secrets without revealing her exact location. The journalist's voice on the other end was a mixture of disbelief and awe as she described the decades-old intelligence operations, the prototype systems, and the covert experiments that had been concealed from the public. Lena did not linger. She remained mobile, vigilant, and aware that disclosure was both a shield and a provocation. The truth could save her life or put it at greater risk. By midday, Lena had disappeared into the forest completely, leaving the abandoned outpost behind as a monument to the past. The site, once quiet and forgotten, had become alive with consequences she could neither predict nor fully control. Yet for the first time since leaving the military, she felt a sense of empowerment. She had survived, she had uncovered the truth, and she had turned the tables on forces that had assumed they were in control. As the sun rose fully, casting golden light across the forest, Lena Parker paused to watch the horizon. Helicopters might hum in the distance. Operatives might search in vain. The past might attempt to reclaim her, but she was no longer just a former sniper. She was a force to be reckoned with, a ghost who moved unseen, carrying knowledge too dangerous to ignore. And while the immediate threat had passed, the lingering hum of the unknown reminded her that her story was far from over. The battlefield may have changed, the players may have shifted, but Lena Parker had emerged victorious and fully aware that the hunt could resume at any moment.